For 11 years, I have driven snowplows for the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Although it's not glamorous, I don't mind working nights, and the compensation is respectable. The loneliness, the cold, and the seemingly endless highway sections, with nothing but your headlights and the sound of the blades scratching asphalt, are things that most people detest. In fact, I like it better. I used to, at least. During one of the greatest blizzards in years, this occurred in February of last year. The kind when there is no visibility and the snow falls so quickly that your plow can hardly keep up. Route 12, a 70-mile roadway between Wilmer and Montevideo, was given to me. There are only a few small towns, mostly countryside, and nothing but cold and darkness. My shift began at 10 p.m. The highway was covered in 8 inches of fresh snow after the storm had been going on for 3 hours. After confirming my route over radio with dispatch, I set out. It was a typical first hour. I monitored the white line at the road's side, kept the plow down, and drove at a steady 20 miles per hour. I had drove through worse, even though the snow was falling heavily. I passed mile marker 47 at midnight. An automobile was parked on the shoulder. It was a dark car with a Toyota or Honda appearance. With the snow covering it, it's difficult to tell. Through the white, the warning lights were on and blinking feebly. I reached for my radio and slowed down. "This is Unit 12, dispatch. At mile marker 47, I encountered a stranded car. It doesn't appear deserted. Do you want me to contact the state patrol about it?" A pause occurred. The dispatcher then returned. "We don't see any cars recorded on your route tonight, Unit 12. Most likely someone who stopped before the storm. When things get better, we'll dispatch a patrol unit." I acknowledged and continued. Leaving a car outside troubled me a little, but there wasn't much I could do if it was abandoned. I plowed on, heading west. The snow never stopped. The wind was so severe that it rocked the truck every few minutes, and my wipers could hardly keep the windscreen clear. 1 a.m. The M. I arrived at mile point 52. I saw it once more at that point. It was the same vehicle, a dark sedan with dim warning lights that blinked through the snow. Just like before, it was dragged over on the shoulder. My truck skidded a little before stopping when I used the brakes. I gazed through my windscreen at the vehicle. This was illogical. 5 miles ago, I had just passed this automobile. It could not have possibly outpaced me. I had been plowing the entire length of the highway, which was a single straight line. No one could have passed me in a car without me noticing them. I reached for my radio once more. "Unit 12, dispatch. I'm seeing the same car once more at mile marker 52. Same position, same manufacturer. This is nonsensical." One more pause. Section 12. "You mentioned mile marker 52. That is 5 miles away from the first vehicle you reported. It could be a different vehicle. This kind of storm traps a lot of people." That was what I wanted to think, but something didn't feel right. The vehicle had the same appearance. The hazard lights have the same slow rhythm, the same angle, and the same shoulder placement. I exited my vehicle. I felt the cold right away. The wind was slicing through my coat as if I had nothing on. With my torch shining through the falling snow, I gently walked up to the automobile. A thick covering of snow and ice coated the windows. I was unable to look inside. I rapped on the window on the driver's side. No answer. I gave the door handle a try. Locked. I used my glove to remove some snow from the windscreen before shining my torch inside. There was nothing in the automobile. Nobody is behind the wheel. The rear is empty. However, this is what turned my stomach. The hazard lights continued to glow even after the engine was completely cold and off. I looked under the hood. Very cold. This vehicle hadn't been in use lately, perhaps not for several hours. I reported what I discovered by radioing dispatch once more. When the roads were safer, they promised to send someone out. I returned to my vehicle and resumed my plowing. I made an effort to concentrate on the road, the white line, or anything other than that car. But I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling. 2 a.m. I arrived at mile marker 58. Once more, the vehicle was present, the same location, the same shoulder, the same warning lights. This time, I didn't stop. I simply continued to drive, my hands so tightly clutching the wheels that my knuckles turned white. I sent a radio message to dispatch. I knew what I was seeing, even though they said I was probably seeing various cars, since the storm was distorting my perspective. The exact same vehicle. I continued driving through mile markers 60, 65, and 70. Every time I believed I was free of it, I persuaded myself that it was only in my head. I would climb a little hill or round a minor bend, and there it would be, constantly on my shoulder, always in front of me, with those repetitive, sluggish danger lights slicing through the snow. I stopped plowing at mile marker 73. After stopping and shutting off my truck, I sat in the dark. The wind pounding on the cab and the soft tick-tick-tick of my own warning lights were the only sounds. I glanced at my rearview mirror. There was only new snow and my plow's tracks on the highway behind me. I glanced forward. The automobile was there, perhaps 100 yards along the road. I'm not sure how long I sat there. 10 or 30 minutes perhaps. Time seemed odd. After a while, I restarted my truck and began cautiously approaching it. 5 miles per hour. The vehicle drew nearer. 50, 30, and 20 yards. Now I could see the warning lights plainly, cutting in that same glacial pattern through the snow. 10 yards. 5. I was standing next to it. I paused and peered out my window. The vehicle was there, its danger lights blinking, and its driver's side facing me. I took out my torch. I almost fell due to the wind. I staggered over to the car and used my hand to clear snow while pressing my face against the driver's side glass. Like previously, empty. I moved to the passenger side. Empty. I used the rear glass to examine the back seat. Nothing. I returned to the driver's side and tried the handle once more, but it remained locked. At that moment I became aware of something I had never seen before. The car's tire traces were absent. With the exception of my own footprints, the snow surrounding it was entirely undisturbed. There were no footprints on the shoulder or the road. The car was just sitting there, as if something that didn't need to drive had put it there. My heart pounded so loudly that I could hear it over the wind as I slowly retreated. I returned to my truck, shifted into drive, and climbed behind the wheel. I avoided looking in the mirror. I didn't glance at the roadside. I simply plowed while keeping my eyes forward. Around 5 in the morning, I completed my route. The M. When after returning to the yard, I submitted a report regarding the vehicle. I described everything, including the mile markers. The manager said he would send someone out to check, but he gave me a look that suggested I had gone insane. He summoned me to his office 2 days later. They had traveled the whole distance twice. There was no sign of an automobile or tire tracks on that shoulder. The road was deserted, and the snow had been removed. He inquired if I needed to take a break or if I had been drinking. I pretended to be okay, but I wasn't. I could see the caution lights blinking through the snow every time I closed my eyes. I asked for a route change a week later. They relocated me to a separate highway on the opposite side of the county, Route 7. Since then, I haven't returned to Route 12. I made an effort to move past it, telling myself that it was just fatigue, tension, or some kind of storm trick. However, I encountered another plow driver at a rest break 6 months later. This older man has been doing this for 20 years. We started discussing terrible storms and challenging routes. I brought up Route 12. His expression shifted. After a brief period of silence, he asked me if I had ever seen anything unusual. I informed him of the vehicle. He gave a slow nod, as if he had anticipated it. He told me that in the 1990s, he drove Route 12. He claimed to have seen the same thing. No matter how fast he drove, the same automobile with the same danger lights was constantly ahead of him. Like me, he reported it. He was also fantastic. Over the years, he claimed to have observed it with 3 different drivers. After just one shift, One of them resigned. One more was moved to day routes. For 2 more winters, the third one continued to drive Route 12. He claimed to have become accustomed to it. Then one evening, he failed to return to the yard. The following morning, they discovered his abandoned plow at mile point 47. Doors are open, lights are on, and the engine is running. He has vanished. After weeks of searching, they were unable to locate him. I will never forget the expression on the elderly driver's face, half relief, half warning. I thanked him for the coffee and walked away. Whatever's out there on Route 12, it wants something, and one of these nights, it's going to get it. But occasionally, when I'm plowing late at night, and the snow is falling heavily, making it impossible to see anything, I see headlights sitting in my rearview mirror. Additionally, when I look again, they've vanished. I convince myself it's only my imagination, another plow, or a stranded driver. However, I am aware of what I seen that evening, and I am certain that it remains, lurking on the side of Route 12. Hazard lights are glowing through the snow, waiting for someone to stop and for the next car to notice them. And I'm curious about the driver who vanished. I'm curious if he stopped. I wonder whether he approached that car too many times after getting out of his truck. I wonder whether it wants someone to unlock the door at last. My grandma was a resident of Eagle River, a small town in northern Wisconsin. During my childhood, I spent every winter break. I would be driven up there by my folks to spend a week with her. On the outskirts of town, she had a little farmhouse encircled by woods and frozen fields. I cherished those trips. I spent hours exploring the property, making snowmen and hurling snowballs at fence posts, while Mom made hot chocolate and told me stories about her early years. Even as a child, though, I was uneasy with the one rule Mom constantly gave me and how seriously she took it. The tree in the back field should never be approached. Once I asked her why. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. "That tree isn't for playing. You stay away from it," she added, giving me a look that I couldn't quite decipher. I listened, even though I didn't comprehend what she was saying. It was hard to miss the tree. Perhaps 200 yards from the house, it stood by itself in the center of the rear field. A huge oak, black against the white snow and devoid of leaves, with twisted branches that extended like claws. It appeared dead, or nearly so. I used to gaze at it from the window of my bedroom every winter and wonder what made it so unique that I was unable to approach it. Over the years, I have adhered to the guidelines. I never ventured near that tree, even as a teenager, when I believed I was too old for my grandmother's beliefs. It felt off in some way. It was wrong, like if it didn't belong, but not in an overtly frightening way. There, or perhaps too much like it belonged there. After moving away for college and landing a job in Minneapolis, I stopped going to my grandmother's house as much. When I was 32, she died. Cancer. It happened quickly. I decided to move back and make repairs to the house I inherited, because I was going through a difficult financial period. When I got there in mid-January, the town was completely covered in 2 feet of snow. The house appeared smaller and in some way more depressing than I remembered. During the first few days, I cleaned, went through my grandmother's belongings, and tried not to feel too alone. I discovered a wooden box hidden beneath some Christmas decorations one afternoon while searching the attic for old photo albums. There was a journal, a few black and white photos, and a pile of letters. The handwriting of my granny. I brought it downstairs and began to read. Reminders, grocery lists, and weather-related thoughts made up the majority of it. However, I later discovered a 1969 entry. The date on it was February 14th. It was a brief entry. At last, they ceased to visit and inquire about Martin. The matter is concluded, according to the sheriff. No one is aware of what we did. Harold and I alone. We had to make our own decision, because the earth was too frozen for the cemetery. Please pardon us. In an attempt to understand it, I read it 3 times. I didn't recognize the name, Martin. My granddad was Harold. He passed away prior to my birth. In search of other references, I continued to read the journal. Another entry from March of the same year caught my attention. The tree is expanding once more. After what transpired beneath it, I didn't believe it would. I can't get rid of the idea that Martin is still down there, still furious, even though Harold says I'm being stupid. My hands were trembling. I put down the diary and made my way to the rear window. Against the white landscape, the tree stood there, skeletal and gloomy. I stepped outside after grabbing my boots and coat. It was the kind of cold that burns your lungs. With every step I took, I trudged through the snow in the direction of the tree. It took me over 10 minutes to get there. The tree was even larger up close than I had remembered. The bark was rough and damaged, and the trunk was enormous, easily 6 feet across. I gently made my way around it, in search of anything that would clarify what my grandmother had written. At that point, I observed it. Initials had been carved down to the ground on the far side of the stem. MH 1969. The inscriptions were ancient, hardly noticeable, and nearly engulfed by the bark. I got down on my knees in the snow and cleared the powder from the tree's base. It didn't appear natural because the ground was uneven and slightly elevated. I returned to the house and picked up a shovel. I have no idea what I was thinking. Perhaps I had to know. Perhaps I simply couldn't let it go. I got to work excavating. It took me more than an hour to penetrate the first several inches of the solid frozen ground. However, the earth came up more easily as I passed the frost line. I dug for a further hour or so until my arms ached and my breath came out in ragged clouds. Then the shovel struck something that didn't seem right to touch, something that wasn't rock or dirt. I stopped using the shovel to dig and gradually removed the frozen dirt with my hands. I quickly withdrew after discovering what I had. The old cloth was soiled and deteriorated. Something that had been long since buried. Something that was not supposed to be there. I didn't look any deeper. I sat in the snow, gazing at what I had seen, finally realizing what my grandmother's actions, which she had endured for 50 years, meant. With trembling hands, I plugged the hole back in as best I could and entered. I looked through the remainder of my grandmother's belongings for answers for the remainder of that evening. In another box, I discovered additional letters. They were dated 1968 and 1969 and were from the sister of my grandma. In a few of them, she brought up Martin. He apparently worked on the farm as a hired laborer. The letters were vague, but they alluded to something darker. A quarrel, an accident, something my grandparents had concealed. I continued looking. At the base of an ancient tree, I discovered a February 1969 newspaper clipping in the trunk. It was a brief piece from the local newspaper about a missing local man. The 32-year-old Martin Hughes was last seen on February 12th at the Peterson property. According to the Post, a buddy reported Martin missing when he failed to show up for a scheduled trip to Duff. Police looked into it, but they couldn't find any proof of foul play. The case became cold. Holding the clipping, I pieced it together while sitting on my grandmother's bed. The farm was where Martin Hughes had worked. Something took place. An altercation, a mishap, or even worse. My folks buried him beneath an oak tree in the back field rather than reporting it. The frozen ground made it difficult to dig in the proper manner. Thus, they made the most of what the winter would permit. The burial was so near the surface because of this. The tree didn't appear right because of this. It was more than a tree. It served as a signpost, a decades-long secret. I never learnt the specifics of what transpired. After March 1969, the journal entries ceased. I gave it some thinking, but my grandma never wrote about it again. Continuously, I saw her spending another 50 years in that home, gazing out at that tree every day, witnessing its growth, twisting, and darkening, and living with the awareness of what was beneath it. After 3 months, I sold the house and returned to Minneapolis. I kept what I discovered a secret. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That based on a diary entry from 50 years ago, I discovered something on my own land? They would ask me questions that I didn't want to respond to, and I didn't want to bother them anymore. Martin, whomever he was, had spent more than 50 years beneath that tree. That secret had been my grandmother's lifelong companion. However, this is what I cannot stop contemplating. She warned me as a child to avoid that tree. She established a strict rule that you are not allowed to break. And now I know why. It has nothing to do with the tree. It was about what was underneath it. She didn't want me to play close to that location. I shouldn't have dug. She didn't want me to know what she and my grandfather had done. Late at night, I occasionally consider that. I wonder why it seems so wrong when I reflect on all the winters I spent at her house and gaze out at that tree. Imagine how she must have gazed at it every day, knowing that Martin was down there in the cold ground, and what lay beneath. I was up in a small upstate New York hamlet, where everyone knew one another, and things never truly changed. I drove the same route to work every morning, for 15 years, from the year I started working at the post office until the year I moved away. It led me down County Road 9, a 2-lane road that wound through woodlands and farms. That route was harsh in the winter. The wind would blow drifts across the road, and snow would accumulate on the shoulders. However, I was cautious because I knew it well. There was a bus stop about 3 miles from town. The location is marked with a faded sign and a wooden bench. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., I passed Route 4B, the M like a clock, and there was a woman standing there every winter morning for as long as I could remember. She was of ordinary height, perhaps in her 50s, and consistently wore a knit hat and a long brown coat. With her hands in her pockets, she would be waiting on the shoulder. She would wave to me every morning as I drove by. Just a little, courteous gesture, not a massive wave. I would return the nod and continue to drive. It became a part of my morning ritual. I never gave it much thought. This continued for many years. She would be there every winter. The same coat, same location, same time. She must have had a job someplace in town, and boarded the bus. Many did. Taking the bus was more affordable than driving, particularly during the winter months when petrol prices increased and commuting became risky due to poor road conditions. However, I never witnessed her getting on a bus. There was never a bus that stopped there that I saw. She was just waiting when I noticed her. She wasn't there when I passed the bus stop one morning, perhaps 7 or 8 years into this habit. I was more confused by it than I should have been. I really slowed down to see whether she had changed her route or was running late, but the station was deserted. Only the snow, the bench, and the sign. For the remainder of the day, I felt very uneasy. She returned the following morning, the same wave, same location. It seemed absurd, but I felt relieved. If a stranger was at a bus stop, why should I care? However, I did. She became a part of the scenery and my daily routine, a constant in a constantly shifting world. I didn't find out the truth until I was 43, over 15 years after I'd first started dating her. I casually mentioned the woman at the bus stop to a coworker when we were having coffee at the town's cafe. My coworker gave me an odd look when I said something like, "You ever notice that woman on County Road 9 who's always waiting for the bus? She's been there for years." "Which woman?" I gave her a description: the knit hat, the brown coat, the courteous wave. My colleague shook his head. County Road 9 does not have a bus route. Following the catastrophe, Route 4B was abandoned in the 1980s. I gazed at him. What mishap? Leaning back in his chair, he put down his coffee. "Really, you have no idea. At the time, it was a huge issue. I believe that was the winter of '84. On black ice, a bus skidded off the road and collided with a tree. The driver failed to arrive. Additionally, there was a female passenger. She also didn't make it. Following that, they declared the route unsafe and closed it. It was something deeper than the diner's air conditioning that made me feel chilly. "Where did it take place?" I inquired. He gave it some thinking. "That old wooden bench is located on County Road 9, about 3 miles outside of town." I left my coffee unfinished. I drove directly to the bus station after leaving the diner. It was a sunny, chilly midday, the kind of winter afternoon when everything appears crisp and clear. After parking on the shoulder, I exited. The ancient, aged bench was there. The worn and corroded sign remained in place. I strolled around Route 4B in search of anything that would make sense. I noticed the little memorial at that point. Half buried in snow, it was situated away from the road. A name etched into a wooden cross. Puit Elanar, 1936 to 1984. "Still waiting" was written beneath the name. I stood staring at the cross for a long time. For 15 years, I had been watching Elanar Puit every winter morning. The woman who gave me a wave. The woman who never got on a bus, never aged, and never altered. In a daze, I drove home. I had trouble falling asleep that night. She had been there every winter morning, waiting at that bus stop, and I couldn't stop thinking about her. I took my regular trip the following morning. She wouldn't be there, I told myself. I convinced myself that everything had been a shared hallucination or false recollection. However, at 6:45 a.m., I arrived at the bus station. She was present. The same knit hat, coat, and location. She gave me a wave. With my hands on the steering wheel, I reduced my speed. As I went by, I fixed my gaze on her. She appeared to be a woman waiting for a bus, rather than a ghost or a vision. I continued to drive. I didn't return the wave. I took a different route to work for the next 2 weeks. My travel took an additional 20 minutes, but I couldn't bring myself to pass that bus stop once more. Knowing what I knew, I was unable to look at her. Eventually, though, I had to return. The other path was too time-consuming and inconvenient. So I went on a drive one morning. Once more, County Road 9. At 6:45, I arrived at the bus station. She was present. She gave a wave. I stopped this time. I have no idea why. Perhaps I had to face it. Perhaps I had to find out whether she was genuine. I rolled down my window after pulling over onto the shoulder. She moved in the direction of my car. I took a different route to work for the next 2 weeks. My travel took an additional 20 minutes, but I couldn't bring myself to pass that bus stop once more. I was unable to look at her, knowing what I knew. Eventually, though, I had to return. The other path was also excessively lengthy. I traveled County Road 9 once again one morning. At 6:45, I arrived at the bus station. She was present. She gave a wave. I stopped this time. I have no idea why. Perhaps I had to face it. Perhaps I had to find out whether she was genuine. I rolled down my window after pulling over onto the shoulder. She approached my automobile cautiously and carefully. She paused a few feet away and gave me a glance. I could see her face plainly up close. She appeared worn out. Not elderly, just worn out, as if she had been waiting a very long time. I said, "Can I help you?" My voice sounded hollow and weird. She grinned, a tiny melancholy smile. Her speech was hardly audible above a whisper. "It's always late." I was at a loss for words. I simply sat there, gazing at her. She appeared to be anticipating something as she gazed down the road towards the town. I said, "How long have you been waiting?" She took a while to respond. She simply continued to gaze down the street. "A long time. But it'll come eventually. It always does," she finally remarked. I wanted to tell her that the bus would never arrive, that it had been cancelled 40 years prior, and that she should stop waiting, but I was unable to do so. The words became lodged in my throat. For a brief moment, I noticed something in her eyes as she turned to face me again. Perhaps sadness or recognition. She waved back all these years and whispered softly, "You've been kind." Nowadays, very few people do that. My chest constricted. "How many people are aware of you?" I inquired. She considered it. "Less every year, but I remain here and continue to wait." I simply nodded and pulled up my window as I drove off, seeing her in my rearview mirror as she stood there with her hands in her pockets and watched me go. A week later, I drove past the bus stop again, earlier this time, around 6:15 a.m., before I usually saw her. I wanted to see if she was there all the time, or just when I passed by. The stop was empty, with only the bench, the sign, and the snow. But when I drove back the same way at 6:45, she was there. The same spot, the same wave, as if she had appeared just for me. That image stuck with me. I moved out of state 6 months later, took a job in Pennsylvania, and left that town behind. I never drove County Road 9 again, but occasionally on winter mornings on my way to work, I slow down for a moment to check if she's still there, standing on the shoulder of County Road 9, waiting for a bus that will never arrive, still waving at strangers, still trapped in that moment. I wonder if she knows, if she'll ever stop waiting. And I think about what she said, that fewer people see her every year. I'm not sure if I want to know, but every winter when the first snow falls, I think about her. I hope someone still drives past that bus stop at 6:45 a.m. I wonder what happens when no one sees her anymore, when the last person who remembers her stops driving that road, or when the last person who waves back is gone. Does she fade away, or does she just keep standing there, invisible and alone, waiting for a bus that crashed 40 years ago? It's worse than any ghost story I've ever heard to consider her standing there, forgotten and unseen, waiting in the cold forever.